Another evening, another world to visit. Friend, get settled. Let the blanket find its place around your shoulders. Let your eyes go heavy, and let the room around you go quiet and dim. Tonight we are stepping into a bathroom. I know how that sounds. Bear with me. This is not just any bathroom. This is a bathroom the color of a rose in bloom, floor to ceiling, tub to toilet, tile to towel. It is May of 1956 in a brand new house in a brand new subdivision, and the sun is just starting to come up gold through a set of sheer white curtains. Somewhere behind a door with a small brass lock, a woman is about to begin the most private hour of her day, and almost no one who ever wrote a history book thought to ask what happened in that hour. We are going to ask. We will follow her from the moment her alarm clock ticks awake at 6 in the morning, through the ritual of pin curls unwound and cold cream wiped away, through a long day of scrubbing porcelain and folding towels and holding her face together for people who never once wondered what it cost her. When the house goes still and she sits alone in that same pink room for the last few minutes that belong only to her. Along the way, we will talk about chrome faucets and Camay soap, about the price of a lipstick and the price of a house, about a first lady who made pink bathrooms fashionable and a whole country of women who spent their mornings living up to that fashion. We will talk about labor that never earned a paycheck and never earned a name, and about the strange, small freedom of a locked door. None of this is meant to alarm you. Quite the opposite. This is a story to drift on, the way you might drift down a slow river, past a house you will never enter in waking life. There is nothing here to solve tonight. There is only a life to watch, gently, the way you might watch someone else's window light up across the street on a cold night, glad to know they are home and warm and going about their evening. So get comfortable. Turn the lights down. If you can, let your breathing slow to match mine. There is a house waiting for us, on a street lined with young maple trees, in a town that smelled like rubber and rain. Tonight, we are going to spend a full day, sunrise to sunrise, inside the life of a woman we will call Arlene Kowalski, a housewife living in a post-war suburb outside Akron, Ohio, in the spring of 1956. We will follow her through her morning grooming ritual, in her brand new pink bathroom, through a day of work that the era refused to count as work at all, and into a nighttime routine built to erase every trace of the effort behind it. The picture most of us carry of a scene like this comes from an advertisement, a woman in a shirtwaist dress, hair set, lipstick perfect, smiling over a percolator of coffee while sunlight pours through a spotless window. Picture the advertisement a little more closely, because the specifics matter. The woman in it stands at her stove in low heels and a full skirt, her hair set into loose glossy waves, an apron somehow managing to look decorative rather than protective, and a headline nearby promises that keeping a modern home has never been easier thanks to whichever appliance or cleanser happens to be selling on that same page. Nothing in the photograph shows a toothbrush dipped in bleach, or a scalp saw from a night spent pinned beneath metal rollers, or the quiet arithmetic a woman ran in her head over the cost of the very lipstick she's wearing in that photograph. The image sold a fantasy of ease precisely by hiding every trace of the labor that fantasy actually required. It is a comfortable picture. It asks nothing of you. It suggests the tile was pink because pink was simply pretty, and that the woman smiled because she was content. Full stop. There is a comfortable version of this story and an honest version. Tonight, we are telling the honest one. The honest version includes the ache in her forearms from scrubbing grout with a toothbrush and a bottle of bleach. It includes the metal curlers she slept in all night so her hair would look effortless by 7 in the morning, though effortless is the last word for what it actually took. It includes the quiet arithmetic she ran in her head every single day, weighing what a jar of face cream cost against what the grocery budget allowed. And it includes the one door in the house that locked, and what that door meant to a woman who otherwise belonged in some measure. By the time we finish this evening together, I do not think you will look at a photograph of a smiling 1950s housewife quite the same way again. You will see the bathroom behind the smile. You will hear the hum of the wall heater and smell the talcum powder in the air. And you will understand, I hope, that a spotless pink bathroom in 1956 was not proof that life was easy. It was proof of exactly how much work it took to make life look that way. Before we step through that door, if you find this kind of evening restful, if you would rather sink into a history that feels like a place you can actually stand inside than a paragraph you have to memorize, I would be glad if you subscribed. It costs nothing, and it helps this small channel keep the lights on and the stories coming. And if you happen to be awake enough to type, tell me in the comments what city you are listening from tonight and what the clock says where you are. I read every one of them, usually the next morning, with my own cup of coffee going cold beside me. Wherever you are, however late it has gotten, I am glad you are here, friend. Now, let the sound of a ticking alarm clock fade in somewhere in the dark. It is not quite 6 in the morning. The birds outside have only just started. And in a small pink bathroom at the end of a hallway, a woman is about to open her eyes before anyone else in the house does. Because that is the only way this particular morning was ever going to work. It is May of 1956. Say it slowly. 1956. Dwight Eisenhower is president, and next to him, in a role nobody elected but everybody watched, is a small, silver-haired woman named Mamie Eisenhower, who has just spent the better part of a decade making a single color impossible to escape. Pink. Not just any pink. A very specific, dusty, warm shade somewhere between a carnation and a slice of ham, a color the paint and porcelain companies would eventually just call Mamie Pink, because there was no point pretending it belonged to anyone else. She wore it to her husband's inauguration. She decorated rooms of the White House in it. And across the country, in 100,000 new bathrooms, just like the one we are about to enter, women followed her lead. Because if the pink bathroom was good enough for the First Lady of the United States, it was good enough for a rented duplex in Toledo. This is one of those details that changes the picture entirely. Because we tend to think of the 50s in black and white, the way the photographs and the newsreels have come down to us. But the actual decade was in color, and it was in this color more than any other. Pink refrigerators, pink telephones, pink Cadillacs if you had the money, and pink bathrooms if you did not. Let us walk down the street where our house sits tonight. The subdivision is called Elm Terrace, though the elms are still saplings, staked to the ground with wire, waiting their turn to grow into the name. Before the war, this was farmland, 60 acres of it, corn and a little dairy, and now it is streets. Curved streets, which was itself a small revolution. The old grid pattern of city blocks has given way to loops and cul-de-sacs because the men who designed post-war subdivisions had studied the English Garden City and decided that a street which curved felt safer, calmer, further from the noise of downtown, even if downtown was only 4 miles away. The houses themselves are small by the standards that would come later. 1,100 square feet, most of them. 3 bedrooms if you are lucky. 1 bathroom always, a living room with a picture window facing the street so the whole neighborhood can see and admire the drapes you chose. Look closer at the house itself for a moment. It sits low to the ground in the ranch style that has become standard across nearly every subdivision built since the war. A single story stretched wide, rather than stacked tall, sided in white aluminum clapboard with black shutters flanking each window, a detail purely decorative since none of these shutters actually close. A carport, open on two sides, shelters the family car from rain and from the occasional hailstorm that rolls through this part of Ohio each spring. Inside, the pink theme announced by the bathroom does not stop at that one room. The kitchen holds a range and a matching refrigerator in the same rose shade, a set the builder included as a package deal with the bathroom fixtures, because a company selling a homeowner one pink appliance had learned by 1956 that it could usually sell her 3 or 4 more to match. These houses cost somewhere around $11,000 or $12,000 to build, and a family like the one we are about to meet bought theirs with a mortgage backed by the GI Bill. Nothing down, 20 years to pay, a monthly note that comes to just under $70. $70 a month does not sound like much until you know that the man of this house brings home about $90 a week, working the day shift at a rubber plant on the south side of Akron, a city that has called itself the rubber capital of the world since before he was born. The smell of that industry follows the whole town. On a still morning, if the wind comes from the right direction, you can smell the tire plants from 6 miles away, a hot, sulfurous, almost sweet smell that long-time residents stop noticing, newcomers never quite get used to. It mixes, at this hour, with the smell of coal smoke still rising from a few of the older furnaces in town, and underneath both of those, the green, wet smell of an Ohio spring morning. Lilac bushes just past their peak, cut grass from Saturday's mowing, damp asphalt from a shower that passed through around midnight. 6 o'clock in the morning here sounds like very little. A milk truck, 2 streets over, glass bottles clinking gently in their wire rack. A boy on a bicycle, not yet 12, moves along the curb, tossing the morning paper onto porches with the practiced accuracy of someone who has thrown 1,000 papers before this one. A few doors down, a delivery man in a white uniform sets 2 fresh glass bottles of milk into an insulated metal box beside a door, collecting the empties left out the night before, a small transaction repeated at nearly every house on this street, 6 mornings out of 7 all year long. A screen door somewhere, opening and shutting. A robin, loud and insistent, perched on a television aerial, because there is nothing taller yet on this whole new street. Because the mothers, nearly all of them, on nearly every street like this one, across the entire country. This is the part that rarely gets acknowledged when we picture 1956. We picture the husband leaving for work, lunch, pail in hand, kissed at the door. We do not usually picture the hour before that kiss, the hour that made the kiss possible, when a woman got herself ready before she got anyone else ready, because appearing at the breakfast table already assembled, already composed. The economics of this street are worth pausing over for just a moment because they explain so much of what is about to happen behind that pink bathroom door. A rubber worker's wage here puts his family solidly into the new American middle class, comfortable but not wealthy, able to afford the house and the car and just barely the little luxuries that made the house feel modern. A television set costs about $250, close to 3 weeks of his pay. A basic table and chair set in steel and formica runs about $60. And a full bathroom remodel, the kind that gave a house pink tile from floor to ceiling instead of plain white porcelain, could add several $100s to the price of new construction, a cost the builders were happy to pass along, because pink sold houses. It sold them because pink meant something. It meant this family had arrived somewhere. Their own parents, who had lived through a depression and a war, never quite reached. It meant optimism, the specific manufactured optimism of post-war America. The sense that the hard years were over and the good years, the pink years, had finally begun. Walk to the far end of this street, and the subdivision is not even finished yet. Beyond the last few completed houses, a scatter of foundations sit poured and waiting, lumber stacked under canvas tarps, and on weekdays the whole neighborhood wakes to the sound of hammers and a portable cement mixer somewhere past the tree line, evidence that Elm Terrace is less a finished place. The builder, a company out of Cleveland, that has put up 11 subdivisions like this one across northern Ohio since 1949, works from a single standardized set of blueprints, 4 floor plans in total, mirrored and rotated just enough that no two houses facing each other look quite identical, though anyone walking the full length of the street would notice the pattern soon enough. This is the arithmetic of the post-war building boom laid bare. Speed, not individuality, was the entire point, and a pink bathroom, along with a handful of other small colored choices, a green kitchen here, a yellow one 2 doors down, existed largely to give each family the feeling of having chosen something, even inside a house built from the same 4 templates as every other house on the street. The children of this street have already claimed the unfinished lots as their own private kingdom, building forts from scrap lumber the crews leave behind, and on a Saturday, a foreman has been known to chase off a half-dozen boys, Tommy among them more than once, from a foundation hole still too shallow. Arlene has scolded him for it twice this spring already, though she remembers with a private amusement she keeps to herself, doing something not so different as a girl among the alleys behind her father's grocery store, a different kind of unfinished landscape entirely. The cost of all this speed shows up too, in smaller ways that a resident notices only after living here a season or two. Windows that do not quite seal against a January wind. A furnace sized, some neighbors suspect, a shade too small for the square footage it is meant to heat. A driveway poured before the ground beneath it had fully settled, already showing the first hairline crack that will, by the time Tommy is in high school, have widened into something Walt will patch himself on a Saturday afternoon with a bag of concrete mix from the hardware store 6 blocks away. None of this troubles Arlene especially. She has lived in worse. But it is worth noting because the gleaming, finished quality of a house like this one, the quality the pink bathroom announces so confidently, the moment a visitor steps through the front door, sits directly on top of a great deal of haste. Let us walk up the driveway now, past the 2-tone car parked at an angle because the driveway is still new and slightly narrower than it should be, past a rosebush planted the previous autumn that has not yet decided whether it will take to this soil, and in through a side door that leads directly into a small, immaculate kitchen. The house is quiet. A clock on the stove reads 5:58. In a few seconds, an alarm clock in the back bedroom is going to ring, and everything is about to begin. Down the hallway, past a closed door, where 2 children are still asleep, there is another door, and behind it, gleaming faintly in the very first grey light of morning, is the room we came here to see. Pink tile climbs the walls in neat, glossy squares, broken by a single band of black at eye level, the fashion of the moment, the way a woman might wear a black belt with a pink dress. A pink porcelain tub sits along the far wall beneath a small frosted window. A matching pink sink stands on slender chrome legs, and above it a medicine cabinet mirror, still dark, still waiting to show someone her own face. That someone is about to walk in. Her name, for the purposes of tonight, is Arlene Marie Kowalski. She is 29 years old, though people who meet her often guess younger, a fact she has come to enjoy more than she probably should admit. She was born in 1927, a few miles from where she lives now, one of 5 children of a Polish immigrant father, who spent 31 years on the line at a rubber plant, and a mother who took in other people's ironing to help make ends meet. Arlene remembers a childhood without much softness in it, 2 rooms above a grocery store, and she has built, quite deliberately, a life that looks nothing like it. She married Walter Kowalski, called Walt by everyone, including his own mother, in the autumn of 1948. 3 years after he came home from the Pacific with a Bronze Star he never talks about, and a slight, permanent limp from a piece of shrapnel that is still, as far as anyone knows, somewhere in his left calf. She married him, if she is honest with herself, partly out of genuine affection and partly out of the plain, practical relief of a young woman watching so many of her own girlhood friends still unmarried at 21, worried, in the quiet, watchful way of that post-war moment, about becoming what her mother's generation called an old maid at an age that would strike a later generation as absurdly young. Walt was steady, employed, and kind. And 8 years into the marriage, Arlene has found that steady and employed and kind turned out to matter considerably more, day to day, than the more dramatic qualities she once thought she wanted in a husband. Walt works the day shift at the same rubber plant that once employed Arlene's father, building truck tires on a line that never entirely stops. And he is, by the standards of the neighborhood and by Arlene's own private measure, a good husband. He does not drink beyond a beer or 2 on Friday, does not raise his voice, brings his whole paycheck home and lays it on the kitchen table every other Thursday without being asked. They have 2 children. Thomas, called Tommy, is 8 years old, missing his top front tooth since a mishap involving a swing set in April, and consumed at the moment with a plastic model of a B-29 bomber that Walt helped him glue together over 3 evenings. He is taken to speaking with a faint whistle he finds more embarrassing than anyone else in the family, finds it charming. Deborah, called Debbie, is 5, starting kindergarten in the fall, and possesses, in Arlene's private opinion, more opinions of her own than any 5-year-old has any right to. Her stuffed rabbit has a name, Mr. Buttons, assigned with great ceremony the previous Christmas. This house, this street, this pink bathroom, represents something Arlene does not often say out loud, not even to Walt. It represents the fact that she got out. Out of the 2 rooms above the grocery store, out of the smell of other people's laundry, drying on lines strung across an alley, out of a childhood where a bathroom, when there was one at all, was shared with 3 other families on the same floor, and never, under any circumstance, private. Now, here is where most people get this wrong, if I can put it that way. It is easy to look at a woman like Arlene from a distance of 70 years and see only the confinement of her situation, the fact that she cannot open a bank account without Walt's signature, that her name will not appear on the deed to this house, though she pays for it every day in a different currency. All of that is true, and we will come back to it. But it misses something Arlene herself would tell you if you asked her directly, on the right afternoon, with enough patience to let her finish a thought. She would tell you that this house, this bathroom, this version of an ordinary Tuesday feels to her like an achievement, not a cage, an achievement hard won, and she intends to keep it looking exactly as good as it deserves to look. She keeps a small spiral notebook in the kitchen drawer beside the silverware, its cover soft and curling at the corners from months of handling. In it, she is written in a careful, looping hand, taught to her by nuns at St. Casimir's Parish School, the entire architecture of her week. Monday is wash day, Tuesday is ironing, Wednesday is marketing, the downstairs floors. Thursday is the day she does the upstairs and changes the beds. Friday is baking, because Walt likes something sweet in the house for the weekend. Saturday belongs to whatever the children need, and to Walt if his shift allows it. Sunday belongs to Mass at 8, and to a dinner she starts thinking about on Thursday. Today is a Wednesday, which means marketing later this morning and the downstairs floors this afternoon. But first, always first, 6 days out of 7, comes the hour that never gets written down in any notebook, because it is not considered a task in the way scrubbing a floor is a task. It is considered simply getting ready, the invisible preface to every single thing that follows it. There is a private detail about Arlene worth knowing, one that would surprise most of her neighbors. She reads more than anyone in this subdivision suspects, mostly at night after everyone else is asleep, borrowing 3 books at a time from the small branch library that opened downtown last year. She does not read the magazines that tell her how to keep her husband interested or her home immaculate, or rather, she reads those too because they arrive in the mailbox whether she wants them or not. But what she actually loves are novels, thick ones, the kind that take her somewhere entirely outside Elm Terrace for an hour before sleep. She has told no one this except once, her younger sister, on a long-distance telephone call that cost more than either of them wanted to admit. Tucked inside her recipe box, behind a card for her mother-in-law's stuffed cabbage, Arlene keeps a postcard of the Atlantic Ocean at Asbury Park, sent 3 years ago by an aunt who moved east after the war. She has never seen an ocean in her life, has never traveled further from Akron than a cousin's wedding in Pittsburgh, and she thinks about that postcard more often than she would ever admit out loud, usually while standing at the sink with her hands in dishwater, imagining briefly and without any real plan attached to the imagining what it might feel like to stand somewhere with water stretching all the way to the edge of the sky. She also holds a private opinion, one she would never say aloud at a church supper or a neighborhood coffee clatch, which is that she finds the endless comparison among the women on this street, whose curtains, whose roast, whose children's manners, faintly exhausting, and that some mornings she would rather stay in her housecoat until noon than compete in a contest nobody officially announced, but everybody is quietly running. She does not act on this opinion. She gets up. She gets dressed. She competes gracefully, because the alternative feels, to her, like losing something she cannot afford to lose. It is worth picturing her plainly for a moment, because a name and a biography only go so far. Arlene stands a shade over 5'4", slight through the shoulders, but sturdy through the forearms, in the specific way of a woman who has spent a decade wringing laundry by hand before the wringer washer arrived 2 Christmases ago, still her favorite gift Walt has ever given her. Her hair, beneath all the curling and setting, is a plain, unremarkable brown, the kind of brown she has lightened twice with a home rinse from a box, both times deciding afterward that the effort was not worth repeating a 3rd time. She bites the inside of her cheek when she is concentrating hard on something, a habit from childhood arithmetic lessons that has never quite left her, and she hums, almost inaudibly, while she works, snatches of hymns mostly, learned at St. Casimir's decades ago. Her own mother, widowed 3 years now, still lives above that same grocery store, in the same 2 rooms, having refused every offer Arlene and her siblings have made to help her find something better. She and Arlene speak by telephone most Sundays after Mass, brief calls, 10 minutes at most, in which her mother asks after the children, comments once, invariably, on how thin or how heavy Arlene sounds over the wire, and offers advice on nothing much that Arlene receives with the same practice. Half-attentive patience, she offers the beauty columns in her magazines. There is real affection in these calls, and real distance too, the distance of a daughter who built an entirely different kind of life than her mother ever had the chance to choose, and who suspects, without either of them ever saying so, that her mother is proud of her and slightly bewildered by her, in roughly equal measure. Twice a year, at Christmas and on the 4th of July, Arlene's mother rides the bus out to Elm Terrace for the afternoon, sits in the good chair in the front room, and remarks, every single visit without fail, on how much pink there is in this house. A comment she delivers with an expression Arlene has never quite been able to read as approval, or as something gentler and sadder than approval. Arlene has stopped trying to read it. She simply pours her mother a cup of coffee in the good cups and lets the afternoon be whatever it is going to be. Her day today is in most respects entirely ordinary, which is exactly why it is worth our attention. There is no special occasion on the calendar, no holiday, no visit from in-laws, no birthday. It is simply a Wednesday in May, one of perhaps 10,000 mornings that made up the entire visible shape of Arlene Kowalski's adult life. And it is precisely because nothing unusual is scheduled that we can see clearly what an ordinary day actually demanded of a woman like her. The demands begin, as they do every morning but Sunday, at 6 o'clock in the dark, with a small brass alarm clock on the nightstand beside a bed she shares with a man who is currently and will remain for another 40 minutes, entirely asleep. Arlene reaches over before the second ring, silences it with a practiced hand, and lies still for just a moment, looking at the ceiling, doing what she does every single morning of her life before her feet touch the floor. She takes an inventory. What needs washing? What Tommy has outgrown and needs replaced before September? Whether there is enough coffee in the tin to last until Saturday's shopping. Whether Walt seemed tired last night, and whether that tiredness is the ordinary kind or the kind that means something. It takes perhaps 90 seconds, this private accounting, and then it is finished, filed away, and Arlene Kowalski gets up, careful not to let the springs creak, crosses the cold linoleum of the bedroom floor in bare feet, and walks the 11 steps down the hallway toward the one door in this house that for the next hour belongs entirely to her. The door clicks shut, and the little brass hook and eyelatch, the only lock in the house besides the front and back doors, slides into place with a small, satisfying sound. Arlene has always thought of that sound as the true beginning of her day, more than the alarm clock, more than opening her eyes. This is where the day actually starts. She pulls the chain on the ceiling light, and the room blooms into color around her, pink tile catching the bulb's warm glow, chrome fixtures throwing small bright points of reflection across the ceiling. She turns the dial on the wall heater, a compact chrome grill built into the plaster beside the tub, and within a minute or two, it begins its low, steady hum, taking the edge off morning that is still cool enough in May to raise goose flesh on bare arms. The first order of business before anything else is her hair. Arlene slept, as she has slept, nearly every night of her adult life, in a full head of metal curlers, small cylindrical rollers with wire clips that hold pin curls tight against her scalp from the moment she sets them after her bath the night before until the moment she takes them out the following morning. This is not a comfortable way to sleep. It has never been a comfortable way to sleep. The clips press into her scalp in the same handful of places every single night, and there are mornings, this morning among them, when she wakes with a dull, particular ache along the crown of her head, the soreness of having lain for 8 hours on a bed of small metal springs. Let us pause on that for a moment, because it is worth pausing on. The advertisements of this era show women waking with soft, cascading curls already perfectly in place, as though loveliness were simply a fact of the female body, requiring no more effort than breathing. The reality, sitting on the edge of her own bathtub at 6 in the morning, unclipping one curler after another, and setting each one down in a small ceramic dish that used to hold her mother's rosary, is considerably less romantic. Arlene's fingers know the motion without her needing to watch. Clip open, curler out, hair released in a tight ringlet, that she will now spend 15 minutes brushing into something looking, to the rest of the world, effortless. This is one of those details that changes the picture entirely. The effortless look was not effortless. It was manufactured every single morning, out of sore scalps and cold fingers, and 15 minutes nobody else in the house ever witnessed. Because by the time anyone else was awake, the manufacturing was already finished and only the finished product remained on display. She brushes out each curl with a boar bristle brush, working from the ends up the way her mother taught her, reaches for a can of hairspray on the shelf above the sink, holding her breath and giving her hair 2 short bursts that fill the small room with a chemical sweetness that will still be faintly present, mixed with soap and coffee. When Walt kisses her goodbye in 40 minutes, the spray settles. The curls hold. In the mirror, a soft, rounded style begins to take shape, the kind she has worn, with small variations. Next comes her face, and this part of the ritual has its own order, unchanging, learned first from her mother, and refined over a decade of beauty columns in Photoplay and Ladies' Home Journal, that arrive faithfully every month, whether she subscribes or not, passed along from a neighbor 2 doors down who reads them first. She wipes away the previous night's cold cream first, a thin residual film of Pond's she applied before bed to keep her skin from drying overnight, using a folded tissue and small upward strokes, never dragging, because dragging causes lines, and lines are the enemy of every column she has ever read on the subject. Then comes a splash of cold water to close the pores. Dab of Jergens lotion worked into her hands and elbows and the backs of her knees, the coconut and cherry scent of it briefly overpowering even the hairspray. Then the face powder, a pale rose shade, pressed on with a puff from a compact she has owned since her wedding. Applied in careful circular motions across her forehead and cheeks and the bridge of her nose, blended until her skin has the soft, matte finish that every magazine of this decade insists a woman should wake up, though naturally has almost nothing to do with what is actually happening in this bathroom. There is real pressure behind every one of these motions, and it deserves to be named plainly rather than left as a vague cultural mood. A wife in 1956 is expected, by her husband, by her neighbors, by the magazines, and eventually by herself, to appear at breakfast looking as though she rolled out of bed, already finished, already pretty, already composed, because a wife who looked tired, who looked like she was working at her own appearance, was understood to be letting herself go, and letting herself go was spoken of in the hushed, judgmental tone reserved for real failures of character, as something that happened to other women, women whose marriages were understood to be in some kind of trouble as a result. Arlene has heard this exact judgment passed on a woman 2 streets over, at a church coffee hour, by 3 women who would never have described themselves as unkind. As she finishes her face, a precise dab of rouge, high on each cheekbone, blended toward the temple. A careful line of red at her lips, applied not freehand, but with the aid of a small metal lip guide she keeps in the medicine cabinet, a thin, curved template that ensures the color follows the exact shape of her mouth and not hair beyond it, because a lipstick applied even slightly askew reads as sloppy in a way that feels almost moral rather than cosmetic. She blots once on a tissue, checks the result in the mirror from 3 different angles, and is, at last, ready to be seen. The whole process, curlers to lipstick, has taken just under 40 minutes, and not 1 second of it will be visible to anyone who sees her this morning. Walt will see a wife who looks, as he puts it, without any special romance in his voice, but with real satisfaction, put together. The children will see a mother whose face looks the way their mother's face always looks, unremarkable in its consistency, which is itself the entire point. There is more to understand here before we leave this room, because the smells alone tell a story that words sometimes cannot. This bathroom, at 6:15 in the morning, holds a very specific layered scent that belonged to millions of American homes at exactly this hour. Cami soap, pink and perfumed, advertised for years as the soap of beautiful women, sitting damp in its dish by the sink. Scented talcum powder, dusted lightly under her arms and across her collarbone from a tin with a scalloped lid, a fine white residue that will settle faintly on the black tile trim by midweek and need wiping away. Toothpaste, its faint wintergreen sharpness cutting through everything else in the final minute before she leaves the room. And beneath all of it, quietly, the mineral smell of the pink porcelain itself and the ozone tang of the electric heater that has been running now for the better part of half an hour. Arlene unlatches the door, and the hallway air, cooler and plainer, meets her at the threshold. She is, by every outward measure, a finished woman now, hair set, face composed, robe traded for a shirtwaist dress in a small floral print that she pressed herself 2 evenings ago. Behind her, in the pink room she is leaving, the mirror still holds a faint trace of steam at its edges, and a single wire curler she missed sits forgotten in the ceramic rosary dish, waiting for tomorrow. Down the hall, she opens the children's door first, a habit older than either child, and calls them gently awake, the way her own mother once called her, awake in a much smaller apartment above a grocery store that smelled at 6 in the morning of nothing half so sweet as this. On some mornings, though not this one, Debbie wakes early enough to pad down the hallway in her stocking feet and press herself against the bathroom doorframe, watching her mother work through the whole sequence with the solemn, uncritical attention small children bring to any ritual performed often enough in front of them. She has asked, more than once, when she will be old enough for curlers of her own, and Arlene has told her each time, soon enough, in a tone that carries more resignation than she intends her small daughter to hear. There is a version of this exact morning Arlene sometimes thinks without quite finishing the thought, waiting for Debbie 20 years from now, in a bathroom that may or may not be pink, in a house that may or may not look anything like this one, and she is not entirely sure standing at her own mirror on an ordinary Wednesday. Whether she hopes her daughter's morning turns out easier than her own, or simply different, which is not necessarily the same wish at all. The towels in this bathroom deserve a moment of their own attention, because they are, in their own small way, one of the great luxuries of Arlene's adult life. Thick, plush, a full shade darker than the tile itself, monogrammed at one corner, they came as a wedding gift from an aunt on Walt's side, and had been replaced only once in 8 years when the original set finally grew thin enough at the center to let light through. Arlene's own childhood towels, by contrast, were thin grey-white cotton, mismatched, handed down through 3 households before they ever reached her own, and she still, 8 years into this considerably softer life, occasionally catches herself pressing a fresh towel to her face for a moment longer than necessary, simply to feel the plushness of it against her skin, a small private indulgence that costs her nothing and that she has never once mentioned to anyone. Breakfast unfolds in its accustomed order. Tommy is already at the table in his school clothes, hair combed flat with water, because he refuses, on principle, to let his mother near it with a comb of her own. Debbie, still in her nightgown because she has no school to rush toward yet, sits on a step stool at the counter, offering a long and largely incomprehensible account of a dream involving a dog that could talk and did not care for peas. Arlene listens with half her attention, the other half occupied with the bacon, with the toast that needs turning before it burns, with the lunch pail she is filling for Walt, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, an apple and a thermos of coffee. Walt eats, standing at first, then sitting. Once his eggs are in front of him, reading yesterday's evening paper, folded to the sports page, remarking once, without looking up, that the Indians dropped another one last night. He is not an unkind man, and it would not occur to him this morning, or most mornings, to remark on how Arlene looks, because how she looks has never, in 8 years of marriage, been anything other than exactly right. And a thing that is always exactly right stops, after a while, being something a person notices out loud. This is its own kind of quiet weight for Arlene to carry, though she has never once said so, nor even to her sister on the telephone. The praise she might have wanted was traded long ago for the absence of complaint, and she has decided, most days, that the trade was worth making. At 7:45, Walt kisses her at the side door, a brief, habitual kiss that lands somewhere near her cheek so as not to disturb her lipstick, calls goodbye to the children without turning around, and backs the car out of the still narrow driveway, off to a day shift where the smell of hot rubber will cling to his clothes until his shower tonight. Tommy leaves 10 minutes later with 2 other boys from the street, lunch pails swinging, already halfway into an argument about whether a B-29 could outrun a jet, which it plainly could not, though none of them are willing to concede the point before they turn the corner out of sight. And then, for the first time since 6 in the morning, the house belongs only to Arlene and a 5-year-old still finishing her toast, and the pink bathroom down the hall sits empty and gleaming, waiting, all ready for the far less glamorous hour that is coming for it later this morning. Now, the economics behind that pink bathroom deserve their own unhurried explanation, because they touch everything we have watched so far and everything still to come. A full bathroom suite in a fashionable color, tub, sink, and toilet, all matched, cost noticeably more than the plain white fixtures that had been standard for decades. Color added somewhere between $60 and $100 to the base price of the fixtures alone in the mid-1950s, and builders across the country discovered almost by accident that offering a pink or a mint green or a pale yellow bathroom as an upgrade, sometimes even as a standard feature meant to distinguish one subdivision from its competitors, sold houses faster than any other single decorating decision they could make. Elm Terrace's builder chose pink for exactly this reason. It cost him more to install. It let him charge more to sell. The tile itself, the small glossy squares climbing the walls with their single band of black at eye level, came from companies competing hard for a booming post-war market, all of them racing to offer what the trade magazines of the era called personality colors. A bathroom was no longer simply plumbing. It was an expression of the family's taste, their optimism, their arrival into a version of American life that their own parents, most of whom had lived through both a depression and a war, could never have taken for granted. Arlene's own father, Nat Point, never had indoor plumbing at all until Arlene was nearly 10 years old. The 2 rooms above the grocery store used a shared facility down the hall, a detail Arlene rarely mentions but never quite forgets, and it is worth sitting with for a moment because it explains something about why this pink room means as much to her as it does. It is not simply pretty to her. It is proof of distance traveled, measured not in miles, but in decades of hard, unglamorous labor by 2 generations of her family, her father on a factory line and now her husband on one just like it. The cosmetics that filled her medicine cabinet carried their own quiet arithmetic. A jar of Pond's cold cream ran somewhere around 60 cents in 1956. Tube of lipstick, depending on the brand, cost anywhere from 50 cents to $1.50. And a woman who wanted her red to match precisely, season to season, might own 3 or 4 shades at once. A bottle of Jergens lotion cost about 45 cents. A can of hairspray ran close to $1. None of these figures sound like much in isolation, but taken together, across a month, across a year, the cost of simply appearing put together, appearing effortless, came to a real and recurring line item in a household budget that Arlene managed with the same close attention she gave to the grocery bill. The numbers are worth pausing over here, because Walt brings home roughly $90 a week from the plant, close to $470 a month before taxes, a solid working man's wage that places this family firmly in the growing American middle class of the era. Out of that, the mortgage takes just under $70. Groceries for a family of 4 run somewhere around $30 a week, and what remains has to stretch across clothing for 2 growing children, the car payment, the occasional doctor's visit, a little saved toward a proper vacation someday, and, easily overlooked in any household ledger, the ongoing cost of Arlene looking the way a wife in this neighborhood was expected to look. She keeps that cost, like everything else, recorded in the spiral notebook in the kitchen drawer. A line she labels simply, in her small, careful hand, personal, as though giving it a plainer name might make the sum look smaller. It rarely does. A conservative accounting, cold cream and powder and lipstick and hairspray, and the occasional trip to the beauty parlor for a proper set when her own pin curls will not hold, comes to somewhere between $4 and $6 a month, which sounds modest until you place it against the $30 a week she is given for groceries. And, in effect, an entire extra day of feeding her family, spent instead on keeping her own face and hair in the specific condition her household requires of her. There is more to understand here about who actually decided that condition was required. It did not arrive from nowhere. It arrived through magazines that depended on cosmetics and appliance advertising for their survival, through radio programs sponsored by the very companies whose products filled Arlene's medicine cabinet, and through a broader cultural project, deliberate in some places and simply inherited in others, that equated a well-groomed, thoroughly composed wife with a successful marriage and, by extension, a successful nation, one that had won a war and was determined to prove, in peacetime, that its comforts were worth having. The United States economy in 1956 is riding the crest of the longest sustained period of prosperity most of these families have ever known. Factory wages are rising. Home ownership is climbing past 6 in 10 American families for the first time in the nation's history. Television sets are appearing in living rooms at a rate that stuns even the companies manufacturing them. And nearly every advertisement selling any part of this prosperity, the television, the refrigerator, the automobile, features, somewhere in the frame, a woman not unlike Arlene, dressed exactly the way Arlene dresses, standing in a kitchen or a bathroom exactly as clean and exactly as pink as the one down her own hallway. She is, in other words, not simply living in this economy. She is one of its products, marketed to herself every single morning in the very magazines that promise to help her achieve the look those same magazines invented in the first place. It helps to widen the lens a little further before we return to Arlene's Wednesday, because the pink bathroom sitting at the end of her hallway is not an isolated indulgence. It is the visible tip of an entire financial architecture that reshaped the American landscape in less than a decade. Before the war, most American families rented. Home ownership hovered for decades around 4 in 10 households, and the mortgages available to those who did buy typically required enormous down payments, often half the purchase price, repaid over 5 or 10 years at rates that put ownership permanently out of reach for a young rubber worker with a growing family. The GI Bill changed that arithmetic almost overnight. A veteran like Walt could secure a mortgage with little or nothing down, repaid gradually over 20 or even 30 years at rates the government itself guaranteed. Builders responded by constructing entire towns from nothing, Elm Terrace among thousands of subdivisions just like it, stretching from Long Island to Southern California, using standardized floor plans and prefabricated components that let a single crew frame a new house in a matter of days rather than months. This is where the pink bathroom becomes something more than a decorating whim. Builders working at this speed and this scale needed a way to distinguish one identical ranch house from the next identical ranch house 3 streets over, and color, cheap to specify and impossible to miss, became one of their favorite tools. A colored bathroom suite added perhaps 2 or 3% to the total cost of the house, a figure so small against a mortgage stretched across 20 years that almost no young family, dazzled by the idea of a home entirely their own, thought twice about paying it. And once inside that pink bathroom, the same financial logic extended itself into every product Arlene reaches for each morning. Consumer credit, nearly unknown to her parents' generation, who had lived through a depression that made debt feel like a moral failure, expanded rapidly through the 1950s. Department stores offered charge accounts. Appliance companies offered installment plans. A woman could, if she wished, purchase an entire new set of matched bathroom accessories, towels, a bath mat, a shower curtain, a small chrome wastebasket, all coordinated to the exact shade of her tile, paid for over several months rather than all at once. More than any individual item within it was the actual point. Mamie Eisenhower herself understood this dynamic better than most, whether or not she ever thought of it in quite these terms. Manufacturers courted her endorsement deliberately, sending her pink appliances and pink furnishings in hopes she would be photographed near them, because a photograph of the First Lady beside a pink refrigerator sold considerably more pink refrigerators. It worked. By the middle of the decade, pink had become the single most requested color for major home fixtures in the country, a fact that manufacturers themselves tracked closely and advertised proudly, because nothing sold quite so well as the suggestion that the woman at the very top of American society. For Arlene, none of this history is present in any conscious way as she moves through her Wednesday morning. She does not think of Mamie Eisenhower while she wipes cold cream from her cheeks, does not calculate the exact percentage her tile added to the mortgage, does not consider herself a participant in a national marketing campaign. She thinks about breakfast and the grocery budget and whether Debbie's dream about the talking dog means she should check the child's temperature. But she is a participant nonetheless, one of millions, and the pink room around her, however personal it feels, however much it represents her own hard-won escape from her own remembered childhood, was also, in a very real sense, built for her before she ever arrived, shaped by forces considerably larger than one family on one street in one Ohio subdivision. It is worth comparing Elm Terrace, for a moment, to what a subdivision like it looked like, just one income bracket higher. A few miles north, in a newer development built for junior executives and the small but growing class of engineers employed by the tire company's research divisions, houses run closer to $18,000, larger by several hundred square feet, and the bathrooms there often carry not one colored fixture suite, but 2. Matching powder room downstairs, in addition to the family bathroom, a detail Peg Antonelli has mentioned more than once, with a familiar mixture of admiration and faint resentment, reserved for a neighborhood just out of reach. Arlene has seen one of these houses only once, at a cousin's wedding shower, and remembers mostly the sensation of counting, almost against her own will, every small difference between that house and her own: the better cabinet hardware, the tile that ran floor to ceiling in the second bathroom, as well as the first. Evidence that the ladder of appearance extended considerably higher than her own rung on it, and would keep extending for as long as anyone cared to climb. The installment plans that let a family furnish a house like this one worked, in practice, through a network of small weekly or monthly payments that a woman like Arlene tracked as carefully as any banker, though without ever thinking of herself in those terms. A department store account might carry payments of $2 or $3 a month on a living room set. A jeweler downtown offered the same arrangement on a wristwatch Walt had been eyeing since Christmas, 90 cents a week for the better part of a year. This was credit built for a family that earned a steady wage but held very little in savings, and it worked precisely because it was structured in amounts small enough to disappear inside a weekly budget without ever quite registering as debt in the way a Depression-era mind understood the word. Arlene's own mother, raised in that older, more suspicious relationship to borrowed money, has said more than once, gently but pointedly, that she does not understand how her daughter's generation sleeps at night, owing money to 3 different stores at once. Arlene has never quite found a satisfying answer to give her, beyond the plain fact that it is simply how things are done now, and that the alternative, waiting years to afford anything at all, has never struck her as any kind of virtue worth reclaiming. Let us return to that Wednesday now, because the morning is only a third finished, and the middle of the day is going to ask something very different of her than the morning did. By 9 in the morning, Debbie has been walked the 4 houses down to Mrs. Petrosek's, an arrangement between the 2 women that lets each of them steal a few hours twice a week, Arlene watching Mrs. Petrosek's boy on Fridays, in exchange for this Wednesday morning of relative quiet. The house is empty now except for Arlene, and the day's real labor is about to begin. Petrosek, whose given name is Sophie, though nobody on this street has called her that since her wedding, moved to Elm Terrace from a similar development outside Youngstown 2 years ago, when her own husband transferred to a different plant. She and Arlene struck up their arrangement almost by accident, a chance conversation at the mailboxes that revealed both women were quietly worn down by the impossibility of ever getting anything done with a small child underfoot. And within a month, they had settled into the rhythm that still holds today. Wednesdays for Arlene, Fridays for Sophie. Each of them trusting the other with the one thing neither would easily trust to a stranger. It is in its own understated way one of the more remarkable pieces of infrastructure holding up daily life on this entire street, an entirely unofficial system of mutual aid between women who receive no credit for it anywhere, not from their husbands, who mostly assume their wives manage these arrangements the way water simply arrives at a tap, and not from any official record of the neighborhood's actual social architecture, which exists only in the private understanding between the 2 of them. It is 9:15 when she gathers her supplies from beneath the kitchen sink. A can of cleanser, gritty and faintly bleach-scented. A bottle of ammonia kept carefully apart from anything else on the shelf, because even Arlene, without any formal scientific training, has learned through hard experience that mixing it with certain other bottles produces a fume that leaves her coughing and light-headed for the better part of an hour. A stiff, bristled brush, and, set aside specifically for this purpose, toothbrush too worn for anyone's actual teeth, its bristles splayed and yellowed, repurposed entirely for the grout lines between her beautiful pink tile. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told, because it does not photograph well. The advertisements that sold Arlene her pink bathroom showed the room finished, gleaming, empty of any human being actually doing the work of keeping it that way. They did not show a woman on her knees in a housecoat, with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, scrubbing along a grout line with a toothbrush dipped in bleach solution. Because grout, porous and pale, holds soap scum and mildew in a way glossy tile does not, and a bathroom this color shows every trace of neglect with brutal, immediate clarity. White grout gone grey reads against pink tile as a small daily failure, and Arlene has decided long ago that her bathroom will not fail this way. She works methodically, the way she works at everything, starting at the corner nearest the tub and moving along each seam in turn. The bleach solution stinging faintly where a hangnail has left a small break in the skin of her right thumb. The chemical smell fills the small room within minutes, sharp and clean and slightly dangerous, cutting straight through the lingering trace of hairspray and Camay soap from 3 hours earlier. She has learned to crack the small frosted window even in cool weather, because a full hour with the door shut and the fumes building has on more than one occasion left her with a headache that lasted into the evening and a faint, persistent cough that Walt has noticed, but never quite asked about directly. Beneath the sink, alongside the ammonia and the bleach, sits a tin of scouring powder and a bar of pale, gritty soap sold specifically for stubborn stains, a product Arlene's own mother swore by and that Arlene has never quite trusted enough to fully replace with anything newer. However loudly the advertisements insist their chemical formula represents the latest word in household science. She uses both the old and the new, switching between them by instinct built over years rather than by any considered judgment. The same way she moves through most of this house, guided less by instruction than by a kind of inherited, thoughtless expertise passed down from a mother who scrubbed floors in someone else's building for money, and a daughter who now scrubs her own floor in her own house, for reasons that feel, most days, considerably more complicated than money alone. Here is where most people get the story wrong, imagining that a 1950s housewife's day was somehow easier than the working life her husband kept, simply because her labor never appeared on a factory time card. The chemical reality inside a house like this one tells a different story. Ammonia and chlorine bleach, kept in close proximity under nearly every American kitchen sink of this decade, produce a toxic gas if they ever mix, a substance capable of serious harm to the lungs, and even used separately and carefully, both chemicals take a slow, cumulative toll on hands, lungs, and eyes that nobody in 1956 had a proper name for, because nobody in 1956 was studying it in any organized way. Arlene's hands by early afternoon most weeks carry a faint redness across the knuckles that she treats with more Jergens lotion, the same bottle that softened her skin at 6 that morning, now called on to repair the damage her own cleaning has caused it. She works through the tub next, long wide arc of scrubbing that takes nearly 20 minutes on its own. The cleanser, leaving a fine white residue, she rinses away with a rubber hose attachment fitted to the tub spigot. The chrome fixtures get their own separate treatment, a soft cloth and a bottle of glass cleaner, buffed until the faucet throws back a clear, sharp reflection of the small window above it. The toilet, the sink, the black trim tile, each receives its turn. And by the time Arlene straightens up, one hand pressed briefly to the small of her back, close to 11 o'clock has come and gone. There is a moment here worth lingering on, because it captures something the rest of this story is really about. Arlene stands in the doorway of her now spotless bathroom, breathing air still faintly sharp with bleach, and feels two entirely opposite things at once. She feels proud. This room, this color, this gleam represents everything she has built, everything her marriage to a good, steady man has made possible, everything her own mother never had. And beneath that pride, arriving in the same breath, she feels a bone-deep tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the fact that this exact scene, this exact hour of scrubbing, will need to happen again in 4 days, and 4 days after that for as long as this house is her responsibility. Which is to say, for the rest of her adult life, as she currently understands it. She does not resolve this contradiction. She has learned over 8 years of marriage that most days do not require resolving it. They simply require living inside both feelings at once. The pride and the fatigue, side by side, the way the pink tile and the black trim tile sit side by side on the very same wall. Two different things making up a single finished surface. The rest of the midday moves at a gentler pace. Arlene changes out of her housecoat, checks her lipstick in the hall mirror, and walks the 6 blocks to the small shopping strip that serves this end of the subdivision, past a hardware store, a 5 and dime, and the grocery where she is known by name to both the butcher and the woman at the register. She spends close to $30 this week, carefully, checking prices against the running total she keeps in her head, and exchanges a few minutes of unhurried conversation with 2 other women from the neighborhood, Peg Antonelli and June Marsh, standing outside the grocery in the mild May sunshine. Jart Kong pairing notes on a recipe for a gelatin salad that will apparently be required at Saturday's church picnic, whether anyone especially wants it there or not. This conversation matters more than its surface suggests. It is one of the only stretches of Arlene's entire day spent in the company of adults who are, in every meaningful sense, her equals, women who understand precisely what her mornings contain, because their own mornings contain the same thing. There is a kind of unspoken solidarity in these exchanges, brief as they are, a shared language of grout lines and grocery budgets and the exact brand of cold cream that does not leave a residue on the pillowcase. And Arlene walks home a little lighter for having had it, even though nothing of substance was actually discussed. Just after 2, while Debbie is occupied with her blocks at Mrs. Betrasak's a while longer, the doorbell rings once, and Arlene opens it to find Vera Yoda from 2 streets over, a sales case propped open on the porch rail, offering a new shade of lipstick the spring catalog is calling Petal Fire, along with a tin of scented talcum powder in a rose pattern box that catches Arlene's eye immediately, given how closely it matches her own bathroom. She buys the talcum, declines the lipstick for now, though she makes a private note to reconsider it next month, when the grocery budget has a little more give in it, and exchanges 5 unhurried minutes of neighborhood news with Vera before the other woman continues down the block toward the Antonellis' front door. Back at the house by 12:30, she prepares a simple lunch, a sandwich eaten, standing at the counter, because sitting down to eat alone has never felt, to her, like something worth the trouble of clearing and resetting the table for. And then, for perhaps 40 minutes before she needs to collect Debbie, the house belongs entirely to her again, and Arlene does something she has never once mentioned to Walt, to her sister, to Peg, or June, or anyone else on this street. She goes back into the bathroom, not to clean it again, not to fix her face, which needs no fixing at this hour. She simply sits on the closed lid of the toilet, or on the small vanity stool tucked beneath the sink, in the one room in this entire house with a lock on the door, and does nothing at all for a few minutes. This is the part of the story that almost never gets told, and it deserves to be told plainly. In a house that belongs, in every practical sense, to everyone who lives in it, this small pink room, gleaming now from her own morning's labor, is the only square footage that belongs for these few private minutes. Nobody knocks. Nobody calls her name from another room. She sits and breathes and looks at her own reflection in a mirror that has already seen her twice today, and for a few minutes, Arlene Kowalski is not anyone's wife or anyone's mother. She is simply a woman, alone, in a room the color of a rose, And the quiet, unremarkable relief of that fact is one of the truest things about her entire day. At 1:45, he rises, checks her hair in the mirror out of a habit too deep to break even in solitude, and walks the 4 houses down the street to collect her daughter. Davy talks the entire walk home, a long, unbroken account of what she and the Petrosek boy built out of blocks, a tower that fell down twice and was rebuilt twice, taller both times. And Arlene listens properly now, no longer distracted by bacon or budgets, because these 40 minutes each Wednesday, walking slowly home with her daughter's hand in hers, past the still young maple trees, belong to the gentler part of her day, the part the notebook never bothers to record because it needs no reminding. Back at the house, there is ironing that crept over from yesterday, a load of wash to bring in off the line before the afternoon clouds that have been building since noon decide anything, and a roast to season and start low in the oven for tonight's supper, since Thursday is the day she typically braises. But this week's schedule has shifted the meal forward a day to use up a piece of chuck before it turns. Debbie occupies herself at the kitchen table with a coloring book, humming something that resembles faintly a song from the radio, and Arlene moves through these smaller tasks with the same unhurried competence she has brought to everything since 6 o'clock this morning, competence that looks from the outside indistinguishable from ease. It has taken the entire morning and half the afternoon to arrive at this ordinary, unremarkable moment. A woman seasoning a roast in a warm kitchen while her daughter colors nearby, and almost nothing about it will ever be remembered by anyone except Arlene herself. This, more than the pink tile or the chrome fixtures or the perfectly set curls, is the actual architecture of her day. Small task following small task, each one invisible. The moment it is finished, each one required again before the week is out. By 3 o'clock, with the roast settled into its slow, low heat, and Debbie's coloring book abandoned in favor of a nap she will deny needing, Arlene has a rare hour that belongs to nothing in particular, and it is here, in this quiet stretch of an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. A visit from Dr. Reinhold, the general practitioner who serves most of Elm Terrace out of an office above the drugstore downtown, costs $4 for an office visit and closer to $6 if he has to come to the house. This single fact opens a door into a part of Arlene's life we have not yet examined closely. The question of what happened when the invisible strain of a day, like the one we have been watching, became too much to carry silently. It happened more often than the era liked to admit. Just the year before, in 1955, a new medication reached American pharmacy shelves under the brand name Milltown, and within 2 years it would become the fastest-selling prescription drug the country had ever seen. Taken by an estimated 1 in 20 American adults, a startling share of the population for a single pill, prescribed overwhelmingly to women, and prescribed, in the overwhelming majority of cases, for a condition doctors of the period simply called nerves. Nerves was not a precise diagnosis. It was a catch-all, applied to housewives who reported fatigue, tearfulness, irritability, a persistent sense of being overwhelmed by lives that looked, from the outside, entirely comfortable. Dr. Reinhold has prescribed it twice in the past year to women on this very street, and though Arlene herself has never needed it, she knows the medicine cabinets it lives in, knows the small orange bottle by sight from having glimpsed it in more than one neighbor's bathroom. In the unspoken way, women of this era understood a great many things without ever discussing them directly, exactly what kind of exhaustion that pill was meant to quiet. This is where the social architecture around Arlene's life becomes visible in a way the morning's grooming ritual could not show us on its own. Her wife in 1956 operated inside a dense, largely unwritten code of expected behavior, reinforced from every direction at once. The magazines that filled her mailbox had recently begun promoting a concept the editors called togetherness. The idea that a family's happiness depended on a wife who oriented her entire day around her husband's needs and her children's development, treating her own interior life as, at best, a secondary consideration. Her parish reinforced a version of the same message from the pulpit most Sundays, framing a wife's domestic labor as a form of quiet, sanctified service. Admirable, precisely because it asked for no recognition. And her own mother and her mother's entire generation had modeled a stoicism so complete that a woman who complained about her circumstances, even mildly, even to her own sister, risked being quietly judged as somehow less capable than the women around her. Consider, too, the sheer volume of instruction aimed at women like Arlene through print alone. A single issue of a magazine in this period might carry alongside its recipes and fashion illustrations no fewer than a dozen articles and advertisements instructing a wife on some aspect of her conduct, how to greet her husband at the door, how to discuss the day's small frustrations without burdening him after his own long shift, how to manage her children's behavior so that his evening remained undisturbed by the ordinary chaos of raising them. Arlene reads these pieces the way she reads most instruction from outside her own household, with a kind of practiced, half-attentive compliance, absorbing what seems reasonable, quietly setting aside what strikes her as excessive, and rarely discussing any of it with Walt at all, because the entire system was built to operate invisibly, its demands felt but never named, its successes credited to a wife's natural temperament, rather than to the considerable, unpaid administrative labor actually holding the household together. The numbers are worth pausing over one more time. Surveys conducted later in the decade would find that a significant share of American housewives, when asked directly and privately, described real dissatisfaction with lives that appeared, by every external measure, successful. The scholar who would eventually give this feeling its most famous name was still years away from publishing her findings. But the feeling itself was already widespread. In 1956, present in kitchens and bathrooms across the entire country, largely unspoken because there was at this point in history. Class distinctions moved through this world, quietly, but firmly, even within a subdivision, as uniform in appearance as Elm Terrace. Peck Antonelli's husband works in an office downtown rather than on a factory floor, a distinction that places the Antonellis a half-step higher in the neighborhood's unspoken hierarchy, despite houses that look, from the street, essentially identical. Arlene has noticed, without ever remarking on it, that Peg's kitchen holds a slightly newer refrigerator, that her furniture arrived from a slightly better store downtown, and that these small differences, invisible to a casual visitor, are catalogued carefully by every woman on this street, because a woman's home, in this era, functioned as a public record of her husband's standing and, by extension, her own worth as a wife. Consider, for a moment, the woman 3 houses down whom Arlene privately thinks of only as poor Ruth, though never within earshot of anyone. Ruth Delacroix's husband works the same line as Walt, earns roughly the same wage, keeps roughly the same hours, and yet Ruth has been, by the street's unspoken assessment, struggling visibly for the better part of a year. Her curtains slightly less crisp, her own hair slightly less set some mornings when the mail carrier catches her at the door. Her 2 boys slightly less supervised than the standard this street quietly enforces. Nobody has said anything to Ruth directly. Nobody would dream of it, but the judgment moves through the neighborhood anyway, in the careful, coded language of concern, expressed at church coffee hour as worry rather than criticism, though Arlene has come to understand, watching this unfold over several months, that the two often amount to the same thing wearing different clothes. Ruth is, as far as Arlene can tell, without ever asking directly, exactly as tired as everyone else on this street. She has simply run out of whatever reserve of energy the performance requires, and the street has responded not with help, but with a kind of quiet, watchful distance, the precise opposite of what Ruth almost certainly needs. The magazines themselves, meanwhile, sell in numbers that are worth pausing over. A single issue of one of the larger women's monthlies reaches something close to 5 million households across the country, a circulation larger than many of the era's most popular newspapers, and every one of those issues carries the same underlying message, dressed in different recipes and different patterns. That a well-managed home reflects a well-managed woman, and that the reverse is equally true. Ruth, for what it is worth, receives the same magazines Arlene does. She has simply stopped, for reasons nobody on the street will ever ask her about directly, being able to keep pace with what they ask of her. Health, more broadly, deserves its own attention here, because the medical realities facing a woman like Arlene ran considerably further than the question of nerves. Reliable contraception did not yet exist in any form Arlene could obtain through ordinary means. The birth control pill was still several years from approval, and the diaphragm, the method most commonly prescribed to married women who could get a doctor to discuss the subject at all, required a fitting many doctors were reluctant to provide to a woman who was not already raising what her physician considered an appropriate number of children. Arlene and Walt manage their family's size through methods neither of them discusses even with each other in any direct language, a private negotiation conducted mostly through silence and a shared unspoken sense of what feels manageable. There is more to understand here about how a woman's body itself was treated as a matter of household administration rather than personal choice. Prenatal care, when Arlene carried each of her children, consisted of monthly visits to Dr. Reinhold that focused almost entirely on weight gain, a subject the doctor discussed with a bluntness that would strike a modern listener as remarkably harsh, warning her, with both pregnancies, against gaining what he considered too much weight. Aiming the warning less in terms of her own health than in terms of how quickly she would return to her prior figure afterward. Arlene absorbed this instruction the way she absorbed most instruction from men in positions of authority over her life, without argument, though she has mentioned to her sister once that she found it strange to be lectured about her waistline while carrying a child. Religion, for what it is worth, offers Arlene something closer to comfort than constraint, whatever its role in reinforcing the wider social code around her. Mass on Sunday morning at St. Casimir's, the same parish where she learned her careful handwriting as a girl, remains one of the few weekly occasions when Arlene sits quietly among people who knew her family before any of this, before the subdivision, before Walt, before the pink bathroom. And there is something genuinely restful in that continuity. A thread running back through her whole life that has nothing to do with grout lines or lipstick or the exact shade of anyone's refrigerator. None of this makes Arlene a victim in any simple sense. It would flatten her considerably to describe her only that way. She loves her husband in the plain, unglamorous way of 8 years and 2 children together. She takes real satisfaction in a well-run house. But satisfaction and constraint were never, in her life or in the lives of the women around her, mutually exclusive conditions. And it is precisely this coexistence, pride sitting alongside quiet limitation, that the comfortable version of this story. Let us bring these threads back to the woman herself, sitting now in her kitchen, in the quiet hour after Debbie's nap has begun. Because all of this, the medicine cabinets down the street, the magazines in her own mailbox, the doctor's blunt instructions, forms the actual air Arlene Kowalski breathes every day of her life, whether she names any part of it directly or not. She has, so far, managed without the little orange bottle 2 of her neighbors keep in their own medicine cabinets. Whether that remains true for the rest of her life is a question this one Wednesday cannot answer. And it is worth sitting with that uncertainty rather than resolving it too neatly, because Arlene herself is sitting with it most days without resolving it either. The clouds that were building over Elm Terrace at noon have thickened by mid-afternoon, and somewhere down the street a screen door bangs and a child calls out that it is starting to sprinkle. Arlene glances at the clock, thinks of the wash still on the line, and returns, exactly on schedule, to the ordinary demands of her Wednesday. The rain holds off just long enough for Arlene to pull the wash in dry, folding it in quick, practiced motions on the kitchen table, while Debbie watches raindrops start to fleck the window glass. By 4 o'clock, the roast fills the house with a good, dense smell of browned meat and onions, and by 4:20, Walt's car pulls back into the driveway. A day's work and a faint chemical tang of rubber clinging to his shirt in a way 8 years of marriage has made entirely familiar to Arlene, no longer even registering most days as a smell at all. Tommy arrives home 10 minutes later, scraped at one knee from an argument, apparently resolved through minor physical means, about whether that B-29 really could outrun a jet, and the house settles for the next 2 hours into the same controlled chaos of a family reassembling itself after a day spent scattered across a plant floor. Kindergarten friend's living room and a set of classroom desks 4 blocks away. Supper happens at 5:30, the 5 of them, 4, really, since Debbie insists on setting a place for a stuffed rabbit, currently under some obligation to join every meal, gathered around the kitchen table while Walt recounts, in the unhurried, understated way he recounts everything. A. Minor mechanical trouble on the line that cost the shift 20 minutes of production before a foreman sorted it out. Arlene listens, asks the right questions in the right places, refills his coffee without being asked, and mentions, only once, only briefly, that Peg Antonelli's gelatin salad recipe for Saturday's picnic apparently requires a can of fruit cocktail. A small domestic complication that Walt receives with polite, genuine interest and no real understanding of how many additional minutes it has added to Arlene's own mental ledger for the week. This is worth noticing, quietly, without making too much of it. The conversation at this table runs almost entirely in one direction. Walt's day, its minor mechanical trouble, its minor triumphs, gets recounted in some detail and received with attention. Arlene's day, the 40 minutes of grooming, the hour on her knees with a toothbrush and bleach, the quiet arithmetic of a grocery budget stretched to cover a can of fruit cocktail nobody actually needed, goes almost entirely unmentioned, not because Walt would refuse to hear it, but because neither of them has ever quite developed the habit, treating it as the kind of day worth recounting in the first place. It is simply what a day looks like for her, the way weather is simply what a day looks like outside, too constant and too expected to narrate. After supper, Tommy disappears to finish a model airplane wing that came unglued sometime during the afternoon's argument. Debbie is given a bath in the very tub Arlene scrubbed with a toothbrush 8 hours earlier, and Walt settles into the living room with the radio and, once it grows dark enough, the still fairly new television set. Its picture, flickering pale blue light across the room, while he watches a boxing match with the sound turned low enough not to wake the children. Arlene moves through the last domestic tasks of the day. Dishes washed and dried and put away. Lunch pails rinsed and set out for morning. A school shirt of Tommy's mended at the collar, where a button pulled loose sometime this week. Tommy appears at the kitchen doorway just before 8, wing finally reattached and drying, and presents it to his mother with the grave solemnity of an 8-year-old who has solved a genuine engineering problem through nothing but glue and patience. Arlene admires it properly, asks the right questions about which squadron the bomber belongs to, and receives in return a detailed and largely invented account of a mission over the Pacific that owes more to Saturday morning serials than to any actual history of the war his own father fought in. She does not correct him. There will be time enough, she thinks, for Tommy to learn the difference between the war as a game and the war as the thing that left a piece of metal permanently lodged in his father's calf. And tonight is, by the time he heads to bed, properly this time, protest exhausted along with the rest of him, Arlene stands for a moment in the doorway of his room, watching him settle beneath a quilt her own mother stitched 2 Christmases ago, the model bomber propped carefully on the dresser. There are nights, and this is one of them, when the sheer ordinary sweetness of watching her own children fall asleep catches Arlene somewhere beneath the tiredness of the day. A small, wordless gratitude that has nothing to do with pink tile or grocery budgets or any of the day's careful arithmetic, and everything to do with the plain fact of these 2 children existing at all, safe, fed, and sound asleep in a house she has spent this entire day keeping warm and clean. She turns off his lamp, pulls his door most of the way shut, and continues down the hall toward Debbie's room, and then her own evening, at last, toward the one that belongs to her alone. The telephone rings once during the 7 o'clock hour, her sister calling collect from 3 counties over just to talk for a few minutes about nothing. Especially important, a new baby 2 doors down from her, a recipe that did not turn out the way the magazine promised. Arlene stands at the kitchen wall phone with the cord stretched to its limit, glancing occasionally toward the living room where Walt and the children sit with the television, feeling, for these few borrowed minutes, entirely like herself, rather than like anyone's wife or anyone's mother. By 8:30, both children are in bed, Tommy under protest, Debbie without complaint, worn out by an afternoon that included both a fallen block tower and a bath. Arlene sits with Walt for perhaps 45 minutes in the blue glow of the television, her mending basket in her lap even now, needle moving steadily through a sock heel while the boxing match runs its rounds. And there is something genuinely companionable about this stretch of the evening, the 2 of them together in a quiet room, that neither of them would think to describe in any grander terms than ordinary. Though ordinary, on a day like this one, is doing a considerable amount of quiet work. At 9:15, Walt heads to bed, tired from an early shift and an earlier alarm tomorrow, and Arlene, as she does every night but Saturday, stays up alone for the final hour of her day, moving down the hallway toward the same pink door that opened this entire story 14 hours earlier. The room greets her differently at this hour than it did at dawn. The overhead bulb still throws the same warm glow across the same glossy tile, but the small window above the tub now shows full darkness rather than gray early light, and a small ceramic nightlight plugged into the wall socket beside the sink, shaped like a seashell, casts a soft pink glow of its own across the chrome fixtures, doubling, faintly dark, the color of the walls around it. Arlene begins, as she does every night, by undoing the day. A cotton ball, oaked in witch hazel, removes what remains of a lipstick applied fresh that morning and touched up only once. After lunch, a whole day's face wiped away in a few careful strokes. The rouge follows, then the powder, until the woman in the mirror looks considerably closer to 29 Dan than the finished composed wife who left this same room at 6:40 that morning. She washes her face properly next, warm water and a bar of Kame, rinsed clean, and pats it dry with a towel monogrammed in one corner with a small embroidered K, a wedding gift from an aunt who has since passed away. Then comes the night cream, a heavier preparation than the morning's lotion, worked into her skin with slow, deliberate upward strokes, because even this final private act of the day carries instruction behind it. Every beauty column of the era insisting that a wife who wanted to look in 10 years the way she looked at 25 needed to guard against gravity every single night, without exception. Arlene applies it without much conscious thought at this point, the motion worn smooth by a decade of repetition, though there is something in the slow pace of it tonight, something unhurried that separates this cream from the brisker, more purposeful application. This part of the evening is not preparation for anyone else's eyes. Nobody will see this face again until morning. She does it anyway because the habit has outlived any single audience it was originally built for, and because if she is honest with herself in the hush of this hour, she finds something almost meditative in it now, a small, private ritual that asks nothing of her except patience. Last comes her hair, and here the whole morning's process runs, essentially, in reverse. She brushes out the day set section by section and begins winding each portion around a clean metal roller, clipping it snug against her scalp, rebuilding, tonight, exact discomfort she will wake to unwind again in the morning, a cycle so complete and so constant that Arlene rarely stops to notice its strange, circular shape. Curls built each night to be dismantled each morning, a labor with no finish line, only a rhythm. If you are listening tonight from somewhere considerably later than 1956, somewhere with your own version of a face you compose each morning and quietly dismantle each night, there may be something familiar in this small pink room after all, friend. Arlene Kowalski never had permission, not really, to simply stop, to sit at her own sink some ordinary Wednesday with her hair unbrushed and her face bare and call that enough. You do have that permission, whatever shape your own morning ritual takes, whatever mask you have learned without quite meaning to build each day and take down again each night. Tonight, in whatever room you are actually lying in, you are allowed to set it down early. Nobody down this hallway or any hallway is grading the finished result. Arlene, for her part, finishes the last curler, checks the latch on the door one final time out of pure habit, though there is no one left awake to need keeping out, and switches off the overhead bulb, leaving only the small seashell nightlight glowing pink against pink tile, chrome catching its glow in small soft points along the faucet in the towel bar. She stands for just a moment in that dim, rose-colored light, the house entirely quiet around her, the rain that threatened all afternoon, finally arriving now in a light, steady patter against the frosted window. She turns and latches the door and walks the 11 steps back to a bedroom where Walt is already faintly snoring. There is one more thread worth pulling before we step back from this particular day entirely, because Arlene Kowalski, without knowing it, is standing at a hinge point in her country's history, one of those moments that looks, from the inside, like nothing more than an ordinary Wednesday, but that later generations will look back on as the exact hour before everything started, slowly, to shift. Consider what is actually happening beyond the borders of Elm Terrace in the spring of 1956. 400 miles south, in Montgomery, Alabama, a boycott that began the previous December is entering its 6th month, sustained day after day by tens of thousands of black residents walking or carpooling to work rather than ride a segregated bus system. It is worth naming names here rather than leaving history in the abstract, because specificity is what makes history feel real rather than theoretical. The boycott began when a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a city bus, and it has been sustained since then under the leadership of a young minister not yet 30 years old named Martin Luther King, whose name means nothing yet to most of Arlene's neighbors, including, eventually, this one. Arlene reads about the boycott occasionally, in brief items, buried well inside the same evening paper. Walt reads for the sports page, and thinks of it, when she thinks of it at all, as a southern matter, distant from her own Ohio street, not yet understanding as almost no one in her position could yet understand. How directly the decade now beginning would eventually reshape the entire country she's raising her children inside. Closer to home, in ways she also cannot yet name, something is beginning to shift beneath the surface of her own quiet life. In just 7 years, a writer named Betty Friedan will publish a book built from interviews with women remarkably similar to Arlene, women living in subdivisions remarkably similar to Elm Terrace, and she will give a name, for the first time in any widely read way, to the exact feeling Arlene herself experiences most clearly in the quiet minutes she spends alone behind a locked bathroom door. Friedan will call it the problem that has no name, a persistent low-grade dissatisfaction running beneath lives that appeared, by every visible measure, entirely successful, and the book will sell more than 1 million copies within a few years of its release, because it turns out an enormous number of women across the country have been experiencing 20 in private, exactly what Arlene experiences, without any of them, until that book arrives, having a shared word for it. None of this has happened yet in May of 1956. Arlene has no book to read that would tell her this feeling has a name, or that she shares it with more women than she could possibly imagine standing in her own kitchen. But the feeling itself is already present, already real, sitting quietly underneath the pride and the competence and the genuine satisfaction she takes in her well-run house. And it is worth understanding that the years just ahead of her, though she cannot see them coming, are going to bring the first widely shared public language for exactly what she is living through in private. There is more to understand here about what these years will actually change and what they will not. The consumer culture that built Arlene's pink bathroom is not going anywhere. If anything, it is only beginning, and the decade ahead will bring more appliances, more colors, more advertising aimed directly at women like her, an acceleration rather than a retreat. What will begin to shift, slowly, evenly, over the following 2 decades, is the question of whether a woman's entire identity needed to be built around maintaining that consumer culture inside her own 4 walls, or whether something more might be possible alongside it. Closer to Arlene's own daily world, the television flickering blue light across her living room each evening carries its own quiet revolution. In 1950, fewer than 1 household in 10. By this spring, more than 7 in 10 American homes have one, Elm Terrace among them, and the medium is beginning to reshape not just how families spend an evening, but how an entire culture pictures itself, broadcasting into millions of living rooms at once, a remarkably narrow, remarkably consistent vision of what a family, a marriage, and a home were supposed to look like. A vision Arlene's own pink bathroom already unknowingly resembles closely enough to have been a set piece on one of the very programs Walt watches after supper. And 1.5 years from this same evening, in October of 1957, a satellite called Sputnik will cross the sky above towns, just like this one. And the shock of that small silver object will ripple through American classrooms. Even a household as settled into its own routines as this one, accelerating a national conversation about science, education, and just how prepared the country's children, Tommy and Debbie both, actually are for the world coming toward them. Later this same summer, in June, President Eisenhower will sign into law a highway act that commits the federal government to building 41,000 miles of interstate roadway across the country, A project that will, for the following 2 decades, bind Elm Terrace and 10,000 subdivisions just like it ever more tightly to the cities they orbit, making the daily commute from a house like this one to a downtown office increasingly practical and accelerating in the process. Exactly the kind of suburban growth that built the street Arlene lives on in the first place. Tommy's own children, one day, will barely register the highway a mile from this house as anything other than simply how the world has always worked, unaware that its very existence was still, in the spring of 1956. There is a quieter anxiety running beneath all of this optimism too. 1. The schools have already begun rehearsing with the children. Tommy's own classroom has run 2 drills already this school year, ducking beneath desks at a teacher's signal, practicing for a danger nobody quite explains to 8-year-olds in terms they could actually understand. The distant abstract possibility of a war fought with weapons that make the one Walt survived in the Pacific look, by comparison, almost quaint. Arlene does not dwell on this most days. It exists, for her, the way a low hum exists beneath a louder sound, present but rarely attended to directly. One more low-grade worry folded quietly into a day already carrying a great many of them. Consider Debbie, 5 years old tonight, currently asleep in a bedroom 3 doors down from the pink bathroom that will still exist, more or less unchanged, for the whole of her childhood. Debbie will start kindergarten in the fall, will grow up largely within this same Elm Terrace, and will, by the time she reaches her own 20s in the middle 1970s, inhabit a country that looks, in ways her mother could not have anticipated on this one Wednesday, meaningfully different. Birth control, reliably available through a pill, approved for exactly this purpose in 1960, will let Debbie make choices about the size and timing of her own family, that Arlene, managing the same questions through unspoken negotiation. College enrollment among young women will climb steadily across those same decades. And the plain expectation that a married woman's labor belonged, by default, entirely inside her own household, an expectation so complete in 1956 that Arlene has scarcely had occasion to question it directly, will, by the time Debbie is raising children of her own, contested openly in a way it could barely be contested at all in her mother's kitchen. None of this arrives quickly, and none of it arrives easily. The women who eventually organize, write, testify, and march to widen the choices available to someone like Debbie will meet real, sustained resistance, some of it from men, plenty of it from other women who, like Arlene herself in certain private moods, have made a genuine peace with the life this era offered them and see little reason to have that peace disturbed. Change, when it eventually comes to Elm Terrace, and to 10,000 streets just like it, does not arrive as a single dramatic break with the past. It arrives the way most real historical change arrives, unevenly, argued over, contested inside individual kitchens and individual marriages, one household at a time, long after the year we are visiting tonight has become, itself, a kind of pink porcelain memory, gleaming and a little unreal in someone else's imagination of the past. Let us come back one final time to the woman herself, because whatever the coming decades hold for her daughter, this Wednesday belongs entirely to Arlene, and it is nearly finished. Step back now, far enough to see the whole shape of the day we have just spent inside, and certain patterns begin to surface, patterns that reach considerably beyond one woman, one pink bathroom, one Ohio subdivision in the spring of 1956. The first pattern is the sheer invisibility of the labor itself. Across 14 hours we have watched Arlene work almost continuously, 40 minutes of grooming before anyone else woke, an hour of scrubbing grout with a toothbrush and bleach, marketing, ironing, mending, cooking, bathing a child, rebuilding at night the exact hairstyle she will dismantle again by morning, and not 1 minute of it appeared anywhere on a ledger, a time card, or a household budget, except the quiet dollar figures she tracks herself in a spiral notebook nobody else in the house has ever opened. This labor sustained an entire family's daily existence. It left behind, by design, no visible trace of its own effort. The whole point of a well-run 1950s household was that the running of it should be invisible. And a woman who succeeded at this task most completely was, in a strange way, rewarded by having her own considerable competence disappear entirely from view. The second pattern is the performance of effortlessness, closely related to the first, but worth naming separately, because it operates specifically on Arlene's own body and face, rather than on her household. Nothing about the finished, composed woman who greeted Walt at the breakfast table was actually effortless. It was manufactured, piece by piece, curler by curler, in a room nobody else entered, and the entire cultural apparatus around her, the magazines, the advertisements, the unspoken judgment of women like the ones discussed over coffee after church, depended on that manufacturing remaining hidden. A wife who was seen putting in the effort somehow undercut the effect of the effort itself. She was permitted to be beautiful. She was not permitted to be seen working at it. The third pattern is the strange, small sanctuary of a locked door. We spent real time this evening inside a single, specific room, and it is worth asking directly why that room, of all the rooms in this house, became the place where Arlene's private self was allowed to exist at all. The answer has less to do with the bathroom itself than with the rest of the house, where no other door locked, where a wife's time belonged, by unspoken agreement, to whoever in the household needed something from her at any given moment. The bathroom's lock was not designed with privacy of the self in mind. It was designed for plain modesty, a Victorian holdover nobody in 1956 thought twice about. But Arlene, and countless women exactly like her, repurposed that lock for something the house's architects never intended. A few minutes each day when nobody could reach her. And that repurposing tells us something important about how thoroughly a woman's time was otherwise considered communal property. The fourth pattern is the practice of holding two contradictory truths at once without needing to resolve them. We watched Arlene stand in her own doorway at 11 that morning, feeling in the very same breath genuine pride in what she had built and genuine exhaustion at the endlessness of maintaining it. This was not confusion on her part. It was, in fact, a remarkably sophisticated emotional skill, one she exercised daily without ever naming it as a skill. At all the capacity to love a life, while also feeling worn down by its demands, to be simultaneously grateful and depleted, and to keep functioning competently inside both feelings, without letting either one cancel the other out. Most adult lives, in any era, eventually require exactly this capacity. Arlene's era simply demanded it earlier, more constantly, and offered considerably less permission to speak about the depleted half of the equation out loud. The fifth and final pattern worth naming is the economics of appearance. The fact that a specific recurring portion of this family's actual income, several dollars every month, was spent maintaining a version of Arlene that satisfied an entire surrounding culture's expectations of what a wife should look like at all times. This was not vanity, whatever the word might suggest to a modern ear. It was closer to a toll, a fee paid continuously for the privilege of being judged acceptable, and it ran quietly alongside every other bill this household paid, the mortgage, the groceries, car payment, largely unremarked because it had been so thoroughly normalized that neither Arlene nor Walt would have thought to describe it as a bill at all. Taken together, these patterns describe something larger than one woman's Wednesday. They describe a specific arrangement common across an entire decade and an entire country, in which a wife's interior life, her fatigue, her private opinions about gelatin salads, and church coffee hours, and the endless small competitions of her street, her occasional bone-deep tiredness, was expected to remain entirely mediated through her appearance and her household's apparent smoothness, rather than expressed directly. Walt loves his wife, genuinely, in the plain way of 8 years and 2 children together, and yet Walt, most days, encounters a version of Arlene that has already been composed, curled, powdered, and steadied before he ever sees her, a version built specifically to require nothing further of him. The actual woman underneath that composed surface, the one who finds church coffee hours faintly exhausting, the one who reads thick novels late at night to escape this very street for an hour, the one who sits alone behind a locked door simply to breathe, is a woman Walt has met only in fragments, glimpsed occasionally, never quite addressed directly, because the entire system around both of them was built to keep that fragmented, private self carefully out of view. This is not, in the end, a story about a villain. Walt is not cruel. The magazines were not conspiring in any deliberate sense, though their business model certainly benefited from the arrangement. Dr. Reinhold was not malicious, only a product of medical training that had never once asked him to consider a woman's interior life as a legitimate clinical concern. This is instead a story about a system so complete, so thoroughly woven into every ordinary object in this house. The pink tile, the lipstick guide, the metal curlers, the spiral notebook, that almost nobody living inside it in 1956 had the distance to see its actual shape. One is the last creature to notice water. We have the distance now, 70 years removed, and it lets us see something Arlene herself could not quite see, standing inside her own Wednesday. We can see the whole architecture at once, the pink room and the toll it exacted, the pride and the exhaustion sitting together in a single doorway, the locked door that meant more than its designers ever intended. And seeing it clearly, without judgment, without flattening Arlene into either a simple victim or a simple picture of contentment, is itself a kind of quiet honor we can pay her, and the millions of women who lived some close variation of her exact day, 7 decades ago. Pink bathrooms up and down a country that asked a great deal of them, and rarely thought to say so out loud. It is worth adding one final observation before we let these patterns rest, because it would be a disservice to Arlene, and to the argument this evening has tried to build, to leave the impression that all of this belongs safely to the past. The surface details change, the pink tile, the metal curlers, the exact brand names filling a medicine cabinet, but the underlying arrangement, labor made invisible so that its results can appear effortless. Woman's interior life, mediated through her appearance and her household smoothness, has proven considerably more durable than any single decade's fashion. It simply changes its costume from one generation to the next, trading pink porcelain for other surfaces, other performances, other rooms where a person might briefly close a door and breathe. None of this is offered as an accusation aimed at anyone listening tonight, only as an honest acknowledgement that Arlene's Wednesday, distant as it may feel across 70 years and a great many social changes, rhymes with a great many ordinary days still being lived out this very evening, in bathrooms and kitchens considerably updated from hers, by people carrying their own version of the same quiet arithmetic she carried, pride and fatigue, sitting side by side, largely unspoken, in rooms that were never quite built with anyone's rest in mind. There is one more thing worth saying before we let this day close, because it would be too easy from this distance to feel only sorrow looking back at a life like Arlene's, and sorrow alone would misrepresent her, thoroughly as the advertisements once did in the opposite direction. Arlene Kowalski, on the whole, considered her life a good one. She loved her husband, she adored her children, difficult mornings and full-on blocked hours included. She took real, uncomplicated satisfaction in a well-seasoned roast, a properly set curl, a grout line scrubbed back to white. None of what we have named tonight, the invisible labor, the manufactured effortlessness, the mediated version of herself that reached her own husband, erases that satisfaction or makes it somehow false. It simply sits alongside it the way almost everything in Arlene's life sat alongside its opposite. Pride beside fatigue, love beside constraint. A genuine home built inside a system that asked more of her than it ever asked of the man across the breakfast table from her. Perhaps that, more than any single pattern, is the truest thing this particular Wednesday can teach us. Life can be, at once, sincerely good and quietly costly, chosen freely within limits nobody chose for her at all. And it does no honor to Arlene to insist on only one half of that truth. She built something real inside a pink room she did not design, following a script she did not write. And she built it, by every account available to us, with genuine skill, genuine care, and a competence so complete it made itself invisible, which may be the highest and loneliest compliment this era ever paid to the women who lived inside it. Down the hallway from the pink bathroom, the bedroom lit only by the small amount of pink glow reaching under the door from the seashell nightlight, Arlene Kowalski lies still in the dark beside her husband already deep in sleep, his breathing slow and even, one arm thrown loosely across the extra pillow the way it has been thrown most nights. For 8 years, the house around her has gone almost entirely quiet. Down the hall, Tommy shifts once in his sleep, murmurs something about a wing that will not stay glued, and settles again. Dabby's door stands slightly ajar the way it always does, because full darkness still, at 5 years old, holds a few unaccountable terrors, and a thin line of hallway light reaches just far enough into her room to keep them at bay. Outside, the rain that arrived at dusk has softened into something gentler, a steady, quiet patter against the roof, and the young maple trees along the curved street outside, a sound Arlene finds most nights easier to fall asleep to than silence itself. On the nightstand beside her, dimly visible in the last of the light, still leaking from the hallway, sits a paperback novel with a folded corner marking her place, borrowed from the small downtown branch library 3 chapters from its ending, waiting for tomorrow night or the night after. Beside it, though she cannot see it in the dark, sits the spiral notebook, left in the kitchen drawer, as always, already holding, in her own careful hand, the shape of the day now coming. Thursday. Upstairs. Telephone call to her sister she has been meaning to make for 2 weeks, a dozen fresh eggs from the milk delivery, since Wednesday's used the last of them in this evening's supper. Tomorrow, in other words, has already begun in ink, before today has even finished, quite fully closing. This is, in its own small way, the truest shape of Arlene's entire life. One day's ending folded directly into the next day's beginning with barely a seam between them. The metal curlers already set for a morning that has not yet arrived. The notebook already planning hours that have not yet happened. No, turning steadily, quietly, without much pause for anyone, including Arlene herself, to step outside it and simply rest. And yet she does rest most nights, including this one. Whatever the larger pattern asked of her across these 14 hours, whatever invisible toll accumulated in her scrubbed knuckles and her carefully guarded interior life, sleep still comes to her the way it comes to anyone at the true end of a long, full day. gently, gradually, her breathing slowing to match the rain outside, her body finally answerable to no one at all. Somewhere in that sleep, unremembered by morning, there may be a dream about an ocean she has still never seen, or about a daughter grown and gone and settled somewhere entirely her own, or about nothing at all, which is its own kind of mercy after a day like this one. Outside, along the curved streets of Elm Terrace, every house sits dark in roughly the same pattern. One lit porch bulb left burning here and there, out of habit, rather than need. A scattering of parked cars angled slightly in driveways still narrower than they ought to be. A whole subdivision of families breathing at this hour. In roughly the same quiet rhythm Arlene and her own household have just settled into. In a few hours before any of them wake, a milk truck will make its rounds again, glass bottles clinking softly against their wire racks in the dark, and the whole cycle these 14 hours have traced will begin turning once more for Arlene and for every other woman on this street, living some close variation. We will leave her there in that quiet, dark room on an ordinary Wednesday in May of 1956. A good husband breathing steadily beside her, 2 children safely asleep down the hall, a pink room at the end of the hallway gleaming faintly under its small seashell light, waiting, patient and spotless, for 6 o'clock to come around again. If tonight brought you anything close to what it brought her, a few private minutes set entirely apart from whatever this day asked of you, then this evening together has done exactly what it set out to do. Whatever mask you built this morning, whatever version of yourself you presented to a world that rarely thinks to ask what it cost you, you are allowed, right now, in this quiet room of your own, to set it down completely and let sleep take the rest. The rain keeps falling over Elm Terrace, softer now, and it will go on falling long after we have both gone quiet. Somewhere down that dark, curved street, tomorrow is already being written into a spiral notebook nobody else will ever read. But that page belongs to tomorrow. Tonight is finished. Rest well, friend. We have spent a real day in a real room with a woman worth knowing.